based upon preparation. Maintain your iman. Keep firmly holding on to your faith. That's the lesson that we take from the signs before the end of time. The Prophet of Allah, many hadith, so many hadith, he went through the signs before the end of time. One of them, the one that Shaykh mentioned earlier, is the famous hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, when the Prophet of Allah, when Jibreel asked the Prophet of Allah about the Sa'ah, and the Prophet of Allah says, مَا الْمَسْئُولُ عَنْهَا بِعَلْمٍ السَّائِلِ, the one who asks knows no more than the one who is asking. So the precise, minute details about when exactly that last hour comes is known only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then when Jibreel alayhi salam asked, tell me about its ashraf, about its signs, the Prophet of Allah says, إِذَا رَأَيْتَ, if you see the barefooted, Bedouin, naked, herdsmen, constructing lofty buildings, and that is a sign before the end of time. Now what does this show us in essence? It shows that the over-fascination and over-fixation people will have in the end of time will be with wealth, will be with power and wealth and the veneer of excellence, or the veneer of power. Right, so you have these Arab dictatorships in our world who will compete with one another to see who could build the tallest building as a reflection of their own pseudo power. Right, that is something that's very important. And then when he said, for example, إِذَا وَلِدَتِ الْأَمَةُ رَبَّهَا, when you see the slave girl give birth to her mistress, interesting hadith, that in fact many of the ulama have commented upon, what does it mean that the slave girl will give birth to her mistress? One of the potential meanings, Ibn al-Asqalani says that this is a reflection that when you find the Ikas al-Umur, when things are reversed, become the opposite of. So how could it be that a slave girl will give birth to her mistress? Because of course, the mistress is the one who is the dominant, and the slave girl is the one who is subordinate. But could we find a situation in society when the subordinate becomes the dominant? We find that right now in our day and age. So from the 1990s, even if you look in our contemporary context, with the birth of the Bart Simpson culture, and by the way, Bart is an anagram for brat, right? So Matt Groening, the producer and director of The Simpsons, had an idea that he would create a bratish character in Bart Simpson, a child who is in essence dominant over his father and his mother. If you look at the statistics in Parents Line, go on the internet, check out the surveys and statistics in Parents Line, which is about parental abuse. That is about children, sons and daughters abusing their parents. More than 50% of those who abuse are in fact daughters, right? Which in fact is also some kind of an anomaly, right? You don't expect, of course, girls to have an upper hand over their parents, but you're seeing that in our day and age. So many things in essence are opposites of, right? That the ones the Prophet of Allah says, إِذَا رَأَيْتَ, when you see the barefoot, naked herdmen becoming رُؤُوسَ النَّاسِ, becoming the leaders of people, فَذَلِكَ مِنْ أَشْرَاطِ السَّاعَةِ, and that is a sign before the end of time. So, in essence, it's no longer about who is the best leader or who is the most. Imam Al-Shafi'i rahimahullah would say, إِنَّ الْفَقِيهِ هُوَ الْفَقِيهِ بِفِعْلِهِ لَيْسَ الْفَقِيهِ بِنُطْقِهِ وَمَقَالِهِ. That the one who is knowledgeable, the one who is a scholar on account of his deeds, is a scholar on account of his actions, not on account of his eloquent tongue, his eloquent speech. Because if we take that standard, well then we have millions of great scholars, even from the non-Muslims. Because it's not based upon how good a person speaks, it's about what he's doing. And like that, the one who is a leader over people is a leader based upon husnihi, based upon his character, khuluqihi, his excellence. Not about his mulkihi wa malihi, not about his kingdom or about his money. Those are not the defining marks of success or progress or leadership or anything else. But that's what we find right now in our day and age. The Prophet of Allah said in one hadith, إِذَا كَثُرَتْ أَمْوَالُكُمْ, in the signs of the end of time, if you begin to have a lot of money, right? So people have a lot of money. وَقَلُّ مَنَاكُمْ. And the ones who are trustworthy and honest and decent are so few amongst you. So it's quite easy to find someone who is wealthy, to find someone who has a lot of money, but it's so hard to find someone who is simply decent, to find someone who is simply transparent, to find someone who is simply, honest. How hard is it to find that? This is why when the men came from Najran and they said, Ya Rasulullah, ib'ath lana rajulan aminan, send to us someone who is honest, send to us someone who is decent, someone who is trustworthy and truthful. And each of the Sahaba began to look, maybe he will send me. And he said, none of them except who? Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah radiallahu anhu. And then he said, Inna li kulli ummah, every nation has this trustworthy one, and the trustworthy one of our ummah is Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah radiallahu ta'ala anhu. But that is an incentive for us to be truthful, to be decent, to be, honest and not deceptive and not lying and not do fraud and all these kind of crazy things. In the signs before the end of time, we will see what we call a social cultural involution. And what is a social cultural involution? If we take this hadith, when the Prophet of Allah says, if you see this slave girl giving birth to her mistress, and Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani said this is like, you see, and the sign before the end of time, the last hour will come when there is a complete upturning of human affairs. We see this even with regard to knowledge. For in one hadith, the Prophet of Allah, he said that the hour will not come until there is zuhur al-qalam, until there is a manifestation, proliferation of the pen, right? Of the pen. So you look in our country simply, every year we have hundreds of thousands of books being published on all kinds of topics of science and the arts and history and religion and all kinds of things. Some of them might be interesting for us, others are not very interesting, but they're being published. So you find people are more literate. Right, if you take from the middle of the 19th century in America, right, when the literacy levels of African Americans were almost nil, almost none, nowhere in comparison to the white Americans, until today when it's equal between the whites and the blacks in America. I know it's hard, of course, for us to make that distinction because how do we evaluate literacy? Do we look at comprehension levels? Do we look at kind of writing things? That's all debatable, but the point is people are more literate in our world than they were ever before. But the Prophet of Allah in one hadith, he said one of the signs before the end of time will happen, time will become closer, and knowledge will go. So how can you square up the fact that there will be so much literacy and so much writing and reading with the fact that knowledge will go? And this was confusing for Sahaba. Ziyad ibn Labid, he said, Ya Rasulullah, he said, Ya Rasulullah, وَكَيْفَ يَذْهَبُ الْعِلْمِ? How can knowledge go, Ya Rasulullah? إِذَا نَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنِ, if we recite Quran, and then we teach it to our children for them to recite, and then they do it, and then they teach to their children to do it, and this goes on until the end of time. How can knowledge go, Ya Rasulullah? And the Prophet of Allah says to Ziyad ibn Labid, إِنِّي كُنْتُ أَرَى مِنْ أَفْقَهِ رَجُلٍ الْمَدِينَةِ. I used to think you were one of the most intelligent people in Medina, O Ziyad. أَوَلَيْسَ هَذِهِ الْيَهُودُ وَالنَّصَارَى يَقْرَؤُونَ التَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. Do you not see these Jews and Christians recite the Torah and the Injil, but they don't act according to anything in it? So, what's the essence then in our time? We would become more a people of indulgence rather than transcendence. More a people of, vanity rather than real human exploration. Right? So our knowledge would serve a purpose of egos, would serve a purpose of showing off, would serve the purpose of, having these pseudo intellectual brain conflicts. But is it really transformative in our lives? Sahaba, they were people, Allahu Akbar, they would learn a few things. Wallahi, they would describe أَبَرُّهَا قَلُوبًا وَأَعْمَقُهَا عِلْمًا. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud described them as people who had the deepest knowledge it wasn't even like a lot of stuff, but whatever they knew, many of them, it was deep and profound for them. And they would act it out. And you could see them acting it out. And their acting it out would have repercussions and ramifications for the entire earth. That's how great their knowledge was. So for us, what happened is the fact that we're living in a world of visual media, and what is it doing to us as human beings or as Muslims? We become over-dependent on the internet and over-dependent on quick access to information. Whereas before, إن الرجل رحل إلى مصر في هذا الحديث, a man would go to Egypt from Medina for one hadith and not even take a sitting until he returned from his journey. Several hadith like that, man satara ala muslim, whoever conceals and hides the sin of his Muslim brother, Allah conceals and hides his sin in the next life. Or the hadith, يحشر الناس يوم القيامة خفاة عراة غرلا. The people, the Prophet of Allah said, will be resurrected on the day of judgment as naked, barefooted and uncircumcised. And Sahabi says, did the really Prophet say really Ghurla? Did he truly say uncircumcised? And he went all the way to Egypt just to check, did the Prophet really say uncircumcised? There was a profundity about knowledge, about learning, about knowing. It wasn't, I know so many things as if it's just information. Knowledge is different, distinct to that. Like when Edward Gibbon, the famous author of the Rise and the Decline of the Roman Empire, went to Magdalen College in Oxford University, his famous incident, what happened? So he sees all of these dons, right? All of these dons there with their nice, comfortable coats and their hats, and they're very eloquent in their speech. And he's observing them, and he sees them, and wow, they know so much about history and culture and art and religion, and they're debating amongst themselves. And he left that gathering, and what does he say? He said, they know so much about things, but they lack human conscience. But they lack human conscience. Where is the empathy? Where is the life-changing justice? Where is all of that? It's very easy to keep yourself to yourself when you feel gratified thinking, you know what, I'm a great Muslim. Human beings are starving to death. Human beings are being slaughtered to death. Human beings are victims of a gross injustice, corporate greed, capitalism. All of this is affecting them. Where are the great Muslims? Where are the great knowledgeable people who have so much knowledge? Where is your empathy? Right? That is the question. And it's not only Edward Gibbon, it's many of them had that. Chris Hedges in his famous book, Empire of Illusion, in his chapter on illusion of wisdom, has a similar observation. And we don't even need what they say, because Allah and His Prophet are telling us the same thing, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, telling us the same thing. That one of the signs of the end of time is that although there will be a proliferation of writing and these things, the essence is knowledge will go. وَتَظْهَرُ الْفِتَنِ, and fitan will increase. Trials, tests, tribulations will increase. In our world, we have so many difficulties. And wallahi, brothers, I tell you, for us as men, remember the hadith of the Prophet of Allah when he said that, مَا مِن fitna, there is no fitna, أَشَّدُّ عَلَى الرِّجَالِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ, that is harder for men than women. There is no modesty with us, we're speaking deen, and the Prophet of Allah said the hardest fitna for us in our lives would be women. Or one narration, أَضَرُّ عَلَى الرِّجَالِ, more harmful for men than women. That you might find yourself doing good, but the gaze is difficult. This is Sahm min Siham Iblis, this is an arrow from the arrows of Iblis. And also for the women. So this culture of sexual commodification, this culture of the unattainable, flawlessness, right? That's what people like Naomi Klein, they say in a book, The Beauty Myth. It's impossible in its flawlessness. So women struggle, of course, because they have all the advertising agencies telling them the way they should look, what they should wear, how they should wear it, how short they should have it, all these crazy things. And this creates within them anxiety and insecurity. And they can never live up to the standard of, this is how I'm supposed to look. The Prophet of Allah, he warned us about this. And he said, from the signs before the end of time, Sinfan min ahli an-nar la arahuma. Two kinds of people from the people of hell, I've not seen them as yet. One of them are Our people are like army, police, right, in dictatorial, oppressive states. And they have Mount Siyatun Kadnab al-Baqar, Yadribuna biha an-nas. They have tails, like the tails of cows, whips, and they whip people with those. Of what you're seeing right now in Egypt. What you're seeing right now, the return of Fir'aun. What you're seeing right now in Egypt. The army of Fir'aun. Allah gave us early indications. In the Fir'aun wa Haman wa Junudun ma kanu khati'in. They're all in one section. That Fir'aun and his advisors and the army are all one section, are all one block. And so now you find, even though, you know, they remove Morsi, but it's a military-led coup, right? And they have these batons, and they have the bats, and they have the gas canisters, and they have the whips, and all of that. You're seeing the same in Syria. You see the same throughout the world, Muslim countries and also non-Muslim ones. Right? And the Prophet of Allah gave a warning. These are people I've not seen, but they're people of hell. And the second kind of people, kasiyatun aliyat, are the women who are wearing clothes, but they're unclothed. They are clothed, but they're unclothed. And that was something that Sahaba had not seen before. These were people no one had seen before, but you see them in our world. The fact that women clothe themselves, but you can see the body through their clothing, right? This is an indication the Prophet of Allah gave a warning. So we have a difficulty for the women because they're forced to live up to these horrific standards, right? As if this is some kind of a progress of human civilization. This is regression, people. This is regression. This is not progress. This is to regress. And also for the men, because in the face of all of this climate of sexual commodification, we struggle to lower our gazes. Remember the ayat of the Quran, قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ. Tell the men to lower their gazes. وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ, to protect their private parts. ذَلِكَ أَزْكَى لَهُمْ. That is more pure for them. And also in the next ayah, قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ يَغُضُّضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ. Tell the women to also lower their gazes and to protect their private parts. This is from our deen. And this is a trapping in the end of time because it's much worse now than it ever was before. Saying that, what is so unique about our world that did not exist in the time before? Well, it's speed. So when the Prophet of Allah said that from the signs of the end of time, that time will come close, many ulama have speculated what this could mean. Right? Many ulama, they would say 1,000 years back, قَدْ وُجِدَ هَذَا فِي زَمَانِنَا. قَدْ وُجِدَ فِي زَمَانِنَا هَذَا. We're finding this in our time. So ulama in 1,000 years ago would say, you know what, we're seeing this hadith right now, that we see time becoming so close. Right? And the ulama have speculated, could this mean the fact that barakah is taken from time? So people were far more productive in the ages before than we are today. So even with our world of, I remember when I was growing up, my father bought for us, myself and my siblings, from the market, a section, the Encyclopedia Britannica, voluminous. Who had that Encyclopedia Britannica? Even though it was a used copy, and my father would place it nice in his, in a top shelf. It was an old copy, the Encyclopedia Britannica. And we felt actually we were quite privileged because we would know about culture and religion and art and so many things that people could not learn about except having to go to the library perhaps and pick up those big reference books and spend labor for hours on end finding information. Now, what do you have? You have Wikipedia on your phone. So forget the Encyclopedia Britannica, that's an old kind of prehistoric thing. And now you have Wikipedia on your phone. But is it really doing anything for us? Is it making us so wise? Is it making us so knowledgeable? Is it doing that? No. Because the whole element and concept of struggle and research and appreciation for knowledge is removed, is diminished, is fading away. And we take these tidbits of information and we throw them around like slogans and we think we have knowledge. We seek refuge with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was not knowledge, this is information. And that's the distinction between information and knowledge. But the point still remains. The Prophet of Allah says that precisely before the end of time, يَتَقَارَبُ الزَّمَانِ, time will come close. Now, if you think where we are as a human population, we have seen more changes in the last 50 years than people ever saw in the last 1,000 years. And that's quite true. Think about that. More changes in the last 50 years than people ever saw in the last 1,000 years. Right? In networking, in technology, in communication, right? In the demographics of our world, in production. More changes in the last 50 years. I mean, even in the last 10, if I go back and think when I was in school 10, 15 years ago, I mean, we didn't even have, I had my first mobile phone when I was 17. Just coming out of secondary school, going into college, that was my first phone. And that phone was called BT Cellnet, some of you might remember. And it was a phone that could do nothing except phone calls. It was truly a phone. There was no texting, there was nothing except a phone. Now, what is it? You have the Google glasses and you have the internet on the phone, and on the glasses. And you think, wow, that means in the last 15 years, there's been some kind of a, you need to look at the, what do you call it? You need to look at how things are progressing. So in the last 15 years, the same is true right now with modern warfare. Maria Benjamin, the Jewish woman, brave in her own rights, who wrote the book, Killing by Remote Control, the modern warfare of drone attacks in the year 2000, said that there were 50, America had 50 drones. And in the year 2010, it has 7,000 drones. And Israel being the world's largest exporter of drones to 42 countries. So that means where drones started once upon a time somewhere in America until today, where you have drones in 42 different countries and thousands of them, and that's only in 13 years. It means perhaps that in the next 13, 15 years, we're going to have maybe smaller drones, we're going to have home drones, security drones, we're going to have all kinds of different kinds of drones. And this is the way that things develop in our world. We have, right now in our world, saying that we have Wikipedia, we have the internet, we have so many things. What's actually happening is that our real-time moments are far more than they were for people of the past. What does that mean? It means that you and I, all of us, we can watch simultaneously what's happening in Papua New Guinea, Madagascar, Syria, and Egypt on 4 different TV sets, and all that news is live. Now, people of the past, even going back 100 years ago, didn't even know what's happening in the next village next to them, let alone what's happening live in 4 different countries, and you could see that in all different channel stations simultaneously, even though there is a deceit in that because we fail to know or fail to read and learn that the TV corporations and channels and corporations are only in the hands of a handful of people. So people think they're so blessed because they go home, right, and at the end of the working day they have the 1,000 Sky channels, right, and they think, wow, right, what options and choices I have, not knowing that in essence those 1,000 channels are controlled by only 10, 15 CEOs at the end of the day. Right, that's in their hands. They decide what you watch, when you watch it, how you watch it. Right, these are all conglomerates. This is all to control you. If any of you remember reading Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, who's read that in school? You don't need your walking school. If you ever remember, okay, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, which was written in the 1950s, what did he say? He said that in his novel, which is dystopia, about the future, there is a character, Milgram, who in his, he's a firefighter, and his job is to extinguish fires, which means to burn books, because in his future, there is no reading, and if you read, you get killed for it. Because reading makes you think, and thinking makes you critical, and being critical makes you challenge authority. That's the idea. But in his book, there is a thing called a parlor wall. That means everyone goes home at the end of the day, the working day, they have their wives and their kids, and they have the parlor wall. And a parlor wall is a TV screen the size of a wall, right? So you have, you have your buffer. That's it. You have your quick fix, right? We have our 1 hour, half an hour of artificial reality, computer gaming, and the TV that keeps us at bay. So we don't bother thinking about what's happening in Rwanda, or what's happening in Sierra Leone, or what's happening, the worst genocide in the last 55 years was in Congo. 4 million people were killed in the 2 civil conflicts in Congo. Who even knows that? 4 million people plucked out of earth in the 2 civil wars ending last one in 2003. In Congo, 1 million people in Rwanda. All the numbers that we have, 120 plus thousand people being killed, Muslims being killed in Syria. But people, they feel as long as I have my quick fix of my computer game, and I have my movies, and I have my Bollywood, and I have my Hollywood, that's all keeping me at bay. I don't need to worry about big things like that, because you know what? I have the small things to get on with life. And these in essence are buffers. So in 1968, when the Americans committed the massacre in the My Lai massacre, they killed up to 500 innocent peasants. These are villagers, Vietnamese people minding their own business, old people who were plowing their fields, minding their own business. When the Americans came in, they killed all of them. And they threw them in ditches, men, women, children, the animals, everything. The reason why there was no immediate response from the Americans is because in 1969 America landed on the moon. And so now the focus was on the moon landing, which was an achievement, a celebration, rather than having to think about a travesty of... The same thing happened in Indonesia in 1966. Right? The mass uprising power instigated by Britain, created by Britain. And 1 million Indonesians were killed in 1960. 1 million Muslims in Indonesia lost their lives in uprisings in 1966. Mark Curtis has written an article about this. But the reason why there was no immediate reaction from Britain is because in 1966, England plays Argentina in the Football World Cup. And so let's think about football, let's think about achievement, rather than having to think about the loss of life. The same is true all over the world. You always find incidents in 1099 when the Crusaders captured Al-Quds at Shaam, captured Jerusalem from the Muslims, and then the chief Qadi of Damascus, Abu Sa'id al-Harawi, travels with a contingent from the Umayyad Mosque, Jami Umawi in Damascus, from Damascus to Baghdad. And he enters the masjid on the day of Friday, and they go in the masjid and they break the minbar. Ibn al-Athir relates they broke the minbar as an act of outrage, to express the anger, to show them this is unacceptable. You people are enjoying your religion, you're praying and you're making tasbih, wonderful things, but just across the border over there in Syria, Ibn al-Athir says 70,000 Muslims were killed in the city of Jerusalem itself. 70,000 Muslims. So it is okay for one side of the world, therefore, to just get on with their small religious acts of worship. What about the other side of the world then? And that's the thing. And then he recites the poem of Al-Abiwardi. The reason why there was no immediate outrage was because in 1099 when they arrived, the arrival of that group of Al-Harawi coincided with the arrival of the Caliph's second wife from Isfahan. Right? So it was more about celebration. Let's celebrate the coming of the Caliph's second wife, rather than having to worry about the siege of Jerusalem by the Crusaders in 1099. These are all examples of buffers that keep us at bay. But the Muslims should never be like that. So what happens in our world, we have so many real-time events, what happens? Your historical moments increase. So you know more what's happening in Syria or in Egypt or in other places of the world, you know more. But that can also become problematic. Why? Because we have, commentators, they say things, Stanley Cohen. Stanley Cohen is interesting. Stanley Cohen, who is Jewish, who traveled to Turkey, who gave his recent speech on behalf of Muhammad Morsi and the Ikhwan al-Muslimin in support of them and against the coup of General Sisi. That's coming from a Jewish non-Muslim. So just remember that, okay? Remember that. What does he say here? He's written a book about compassion fatigue. So you could see so much of something, you become desensitized with it. That's a reality, it's a fact. You become desensitized. So, if you take MTV, in the 1990s when MTV really kicks off, music television, just as a point, what MTV did is it kind of broke the barrier of mental adjustment to scheduled programming. How did it do that? The shortest edit duration before MTV, permissible on TV, was 2 seconds. So between two movies or two scheduled programming, it was 2 seconds. What MTV did is it broke them. And so from MTV until today, it's now 1/3 of a second. So there is no time, therefore, for your minds to, adjust themselves to scheduled programming. You see it in a continuous loop, right? You see it non-stop. This is why 24-hour news is quite deceptive, because it's not 24-hour news, it's just in a continuous loop. That's the idea. One of the signs of the end of time, the Prophet of Allah said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the same hadith, fitr will increase, وَيَكْثُرَ الْحَرَجِ. And he said that haraj will increase. And the Sahaba, they said, what is that? Ya Rasul, he said, al-qatl al-qatl. It means killing, and killing would increase. So I've mentioned already a few things to you about what happened in Congo, or in Rwanda, or in Sierra Leone, Liberia. You see, we also become victims, my dear brothers in Islam. How do we become victims? Because we become so reliant on the Western media. The Western media shapes and frames worthy victims and unworthy victims. So the worthy victims are those who the Western media chooses to inform us about, and then we have the unworthy ones, those poor Africans in Liberia in the 1990s that who even knows about. Asatu, the Muslim woman, who championed the cause with Lima Gabawi, the Christian woman, to end the suffering, the mass rape of Liberian women in the 1990s. I mean, that is a historical incident. But because the focus of the Western media was not on that, we don't care to know about what's happening in Liberia, or in Sierra Leone, or in Rwanda, or in Congo, for example, or in other parts of the world. So never become a victim of them. The reality is we're seeing an increase in killing. In one hadith, the Prophet of Allah says that the world will not go. حتى يأتي على الناس يوم, until it comes upon a people a day, لا يدري القاتل فيما قتل ولا المقتول فيما قتل, until the one who is killed will not know why he's killed, and the one who kills will not know why he's killing. That's our age. That's our world. So we live in a world of euphemistic language. Right? These shayateen, they fly their bombs over countries, Muslims and sometimes even non-Muslim countries, and they drop bombs, and they call those bombs daisy cutters, and they call their wars clean wars, and they call their operations surgical operations, as if it's some kind of a surgical procedure in a hospital. Like Martin Luther King said, the one, people remember his speech a few weeks ago, the famous I Have a Dream speech. What did he say? He said that, you have guided missiles and you have misguided men. You have guided missiles and you have misguided men. Right? So people hide behind euphemistic language. In Israel, when they capture, occupied Palestine, when they capture Muslims, the Palestinians, and they torture them, they never call it torture. They call it moderate physical pressure. Doesn't sound too bad. In the 1970s, when the British went over to Northern Ireland for the troubles in the paramilitary groups of the Catholics and Protestants, they tortured, but they never called it torture, they called it intensive interrogation. Doesn't sound too bad, right? Hitler, against the mentally challenged children who were born in Germany, and he had them put to death, gassed to death. He called that charitable foundation for institutional care. Doesn't sound too bad. We will often do a charitable foundation for institutional care. But these are all euphemisms. This is to dull our emotions, to make us think, you know what, it's not too bad. Ask the ones who are victims if it's too bad or not. Not relying on the Western media's framing of conflict and human suffering. This is a big problem in our day. I don't have much long time as I know. Dajjal. As the Sheikh mentioned, this is a climax. So you will have a proliferation of dhulm, of injustice, of tyranny, of fitan, of fasad, of fawahish, of indecency, immorality. And the climax will be when the Mahdi alayhi salam comes. And when the Mahdi comes, the Prophet of Allah says, وَيُمْلَوُ الْأَرْضِ قِسْطًا وَعَدْلًا كَمَا مُلِئَتْ ظُلْمًا. He will come and establish justice and goodness on earth the way the earth was corrupted, the way there was injustice and evil on the earth. Right? And then he will وَيُقْسِمُ الْأَمْوَالِ وَيُقْسِمُ الْمَالِ صِحَاحًا. And then he will distribute the wealth, صِحَاحًا. And Sahaba, they said, what does that mean? صِحَاحًا, Ya Rasulullah. He said, بِالسَّوِيَّ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. With equality between the people. Right? I was just remembering Eduardo Galeano, who wrote this famous book, The Open Veins of Latin America. What did he focus on? The fact that in our world we have two hemispheres, the Eastern and the Western Hemisphere. Now you've got to start asking yourself, why is it the Eastern Hemisphere always projected as uncivilized, barbaric, savage-like, poor, struggling, right? And the Western Hemisphere is always, the civilized, the helpers of the world. And then right there you have the IMF and the World Bank. And then you have debt, and national, international debt, controlling the world. So we have this polarization of the world of those who are poor and then those who are wealthy. But we're now seeing the fruits of that. So that in Michigan and Detroit in America, people are having to sleep in their vans and their trucks and their cars, are losing their homes, foreclosures, are losing their jobs, are killing themselves. Epidemic in America of suicide because of the curse of the world, which is a riba banking system. Right? So we see, and this is what Galeano in fact spoke about in that book, about this polarization in our world. The Mahdi, his description from the hadith is that he will correct this. So you will not have the ones who have, where all the world's resources are happen to be the poorest countries, and where there are no natural resources, they happen to be the wealthiest countries. It will be justice in terms of the distribution of wealth. And then of course, we have the arrival of the Dajjal. And I almost can carry on. Look. As the Sheikh mentioned, that Dajjal is the Prophet of Allah says he is the biggest fitna, the biggest trial for Bani Adam. And every prophet from Adam until our last prophet warned his people about the Dajjal. And the Prophet of Allah says, I'm telling you some things that no prophet told you about him before. He's Abba, and your Rabb is not Abba, he's one eye, he's blind in one eye, and your Lord is not one eye. Many hadith. Sahaba would become anxious, they would sit together in circles and they would become anxious when they would think about the Dajjal. And one hadith, the Prophet of Allah said, وَأَكْثَرَ مَنْ يَخْرُجْ إِلَيْهِ النِّسَاءِ. The majority of those who go out to the Dajjal will be women. The Sahih hadith. The majority of those who go out to the Dajjal will be women. حَتَّى أَنَّ الرَّجُلْ until a man يَرْجِعْ إِلَى الْحَمِيمِ وَبَنَتِهِ وَعَمَتِهِ. Until a man will go home to his aunt and his daughter and his mother, and he will tie them up and keep them in one place out of fear that they would go out to the Dajjal. There will be an intrigue about the presence of the Dajjal because of what he brings of shubuhat, of doubts, of what he brings of what people perceive to be miraculous power and the treasures of the earth. An argument against religion, an argument against, God, seeing himself, of course, as a Nabi or as a God, Right? In one hadith, the Prophet of Allah says that that if you hear of the Dajjal, then stay away from him. Stay away from him. Because indeed, a man will go out to the Dajjal and he will see himself to be mu'min, believer. And at the end, He will follow him مما يبعث به من الشبهات وكما قال, because of what the Dajjal brings of doubts. He will become a follower of the Dajjal, even though before he left, he considered himself to be a believer. So that's going to be very, very difficult and tough if we do not hold fast to our religion. If we do not know that in essence, learn the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is Al-Azim. Allah is the one who is great. And Dajjal projects only superficial and pseudo elements of greatness. We should know that as Muslims. Dajjal in essence is weak. He has weaknesses. And from his weaknesses is pride. Pride is a weakness. From his weaknesses is ego. Being egotistic is a weakness. These are weaknesses of the Dajjal. In one narration, one hadith, Dajjal, as an expression, as a demonstration of his power, a man will come along and he will doubt the Dajjal. And the Dajjal will say to him, do you see, if I bring your father and mother back to life, would you believe I'm your Lord? And the man will say, yeah, I believe your Lord if you can bring my father and mother back to life. And two shaitans will take the form of his mother and father, and they will say to their son, Ya bunay, itba'hu fa'innahu rabbuk. They will say, our beloved son, follow him because he's your Lord. Now that's a tough one. People would crumble when they see things like that happening. And even though you think, well, that is power, remember, he's also weak. In one narration, a man will come to the Dajjal, and he will say to the Dajjal, in fact, another hadith, he will meet the army of the Dajjal, and he will say, you know what? They will say to him, do you not believe in our Lord? Do you not believe in our Lord Dajjal? And he will say, no, Allah. And then they will try and kill him. They will want to kill him. And so one of them will speak and say, hasn't your Lord forbidden that no one kills other than him? This is quite remarkable. So they are so subservient and submissive that they will say, you know, we want to kill him, but you know what? We should not kill him because only Dajjal is allowed to kill him. So we shall not kill him. You know, the Nazis was quite like this. If you read the accounts of Philip Moulin or, you know, Primo Levi or other things, you'd find that Adolf Eichmann and Hitler were people like that, right? They created or engineered this this method amongst the Nazis, that even though the Jews and the Gypsies and the communists and the others have to be killed, they have to be killed on time. And the ones who will put in those tablets when the fan starts running are the ones who are authorized to do it. Even though they're going to be killed, it's those who are going to kill are the ones who are entrusted to kill, and you think, wow. And so you see it's right there with the Dajjal. And so they take him to the Dajjal, this man. And Dajjal says to him, do you not believe I'm your Lord? And the man will say, no, Anta al-Masih al-Kadhab. You are the false impostor, the liar. And Dajjal then will saw him in two and will walk between him, and the man will say, Ya ayyuhan nas, O people, innahu la yaf'al ba'di, he will not be able to do after me to anyone else after me. That's a weakness. Another hadith like this hadith, when the man will come and say to Dajjal, Ashhadu annaka Dajjal, I testify you are the Dajjal which our Prophet warned us of. Dajjal then says to his people, Ara'aytum in qataltu hadha. Do you see? So think about the plurality there. There is a big entourage of Dajjal. You see, that's quite interesting, because if you look at the culture of spectatorship, what happens? He has to create a spectacle. So he's saying to those around him, you all see, if I kill this individual, would you doubt me? And if I killed him, brought him back to life, would you doubt me? They would say, no, we won't doubt you. So he will kill him, slaughter him, in two, walk between him, and then bring him back with the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the man will say, as he's coming back to life, you know, ما كنت فيك قد أشد بصيرا مني الآن أو كما قال, I have even now more conviction that you are the Dajjal. Right? Because of what our Prophet told us about, that this is going to happen. And then the Dajjal will fling him, and the people, they will think that he's being flung into hell. But the Prophet of Allah said he's khair al-nas, he's the best of people, and a martyr. Right? So what these hadiths reflect is a weakness in the power of the Dajjal. That there's some things that he can do, other things he cannot do. Some things he can do for a short time, other things he cannot do. Right? And if you learn, I know I have to end right, I'm going to end by saying this. Look, our deen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our wali. Allah is our protector and our guardian. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects the mu'mineen. If we learn to be sincere in our deen, and we are strong in our religion, then inshallah, if we live to see them, and it's very likely, I think, with everything that is happening right now in Syria, it seems that Allah knows best that we're really reaching a point in our human history of a lot of great, worrying, challenging, troubling, instrumental changes in our world. And at the end of the day, those changes will all lead to the major signs of the end of time, because the minor ones have passed us by or are in progression. So, the Prophet of Allah in the hadith, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in qamat as-sa'a, wa fi yadi ahadikum fasila, wa in istata'a la yakun hatta yabrisa falyabrisa. If the hour comes on one of you, and in your hand is a seed, and you're on the floor about to plant the seed, then don't get up until you've planted the seed. Which means, look, we are not like the Jews and the Christians, many of whom are millennialists, have apocalyptic fears, paranoia. You know, they have they do crazy things because they think that these things are imminent. We don't know. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. Abdullah ibn Salam, he says, رضي الله عنه, إذا سمعت بالدجال قد خرج وأنت على واد تغرسها. If you hear that the Dajjal has come out and you're in the wilderness and you're planting your seeds, فلا تعجل أن تصلحه فإن للناس بعد ذلك عيشا. Then do not delay. Do not delay in planting those seeds. Why? Because after that, after Dajjal, there will be life. This is truly for me one of the most beautiful statements of Sahaba I've ever read for me. Because if you think about what's being said right there, what's being said is that, look, we are a people, supposed to be people about future investment, about planning for the future. We don't delay, we don't stop doing it. If you hear that the Dajjal has come out and you're planting the seeds, just finish planting them, because when the Dajjal goes and he has a lifespan and Isa alayhi salam will kill him, then there will still be life for people. Umar ibn Khuzaymah ibn Thabit, he once says that Umar ibn Khattab once saw his father, Umar's father, an old man who had not sowed his seeds, his land. And so Umar asks him, مَا مَنَعَكَ أَن تَغْرِسْ أَرْضَكَ? What is preventing you from sowing your seeds? And the old man says, أَنَا شَيْخٌ كَبِيرٌ أَمُوتْ غَدًا. I'm an old man, I'm going to die tomorrow. What's the point? And Umar says to him, أَعْزِمُ عَلَيْكَ, I compel you now to sow your seeds. And Umar ibn Khuzaymah ibn Thabit says, the next day I saw Umar and my father on the floor. And Umar was sowing those seeds with my father on the floor using his own hands. Teaching us all a lesson. Do what you're here to do. Continue in your job. Carry on struggling. carry on with whatever good that you're doing, carry on with it. Don't become slack, be consistent in it, and improve upon what you're doing. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from the fitan of the times in which we are living, and there are many fitan. May Allah make us truly a jama'ah, that we stay together, that we help one another, that we remain strong as brothers, and help one another. We all have defects and weaknesses. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah says that the fitna of the Dajjal is not limited to his time. Anyone who moves away from this deen based upon, amazing occurrences, amazing things happening, then he has been struck by a fitna of the Dajjal. So people, they see so much splendor in our world, and they think, you know what, that should be my life. That's what I want to achieve in my life. That's being struck by a fitna of the Dajjal. May Allah save us, may Allah protect us, and may Allah have mercy upon all of us, and may Allah send His peace and blessings upon Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa ashabihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillah.